When anybody brings up farming RPGs, the first thing that comes into my mind is Stardew Valley. Stardew is a farming RPG game where you inherit your grandpa's farm. It starts out overgrown with bushes, rocks, trees and logs, which you have to chop down or remove so that you have space for planting crops to make money. The game is so diverse in what you can decide to do each day. You might want to spend a day cleaning your farm, or down in the mines, or fishing, or even just talking to townsfolk and completing daily quests. Stardew Valley was created solely by Eric Barone, who felt that the Harvest Moon series had been getting progressively worse since the Back to Nature installment. He was unable to find a similar game that he was happy with, so he essentially created his own. He stated that he wanted to address the problems that he had with Harvest Moon, and that no other title in the series ever brought it together in a perfect way. So Stardew Valley was sort of a passion project based on his love for a series that didn't quite do things exactly how he thought they should have been done. Some other inspirations for the Stardew series include Animal Crossing, Minecraft, Rune Factory and Terraria, and many aspects of these games can be seen in Stardew Valley, such as the crafting, daily quests, combat, and the community centre. Barone spent 4 years creating the game. Everything from the art, to the music, to the story, to the dialogue. Again, the main inspiration for the game was from one of his all-time favourite series, Harvest Moon. But if Stardew was based off of and tried to do similar things to Harvest Moon, among other games, what makes it stand out? Why bother playing it instead of these other games? There must be something special about Stardew Valley. In terms of the farming RPG genre, Stardew does everything you could ask for. There are tons of farming elements, dozens of NPCs to meet and potentially romance, a bunch of cutscenes and story elements, and the community centre and museum to collect a bunch of items for rewards. But the reason Stardew excels as a farming RPG is in how well it does all of these things. You're never rushed or forced into certain playstyles in Stardew. If you want to focus on the farming elements more, and in your own time, then the game lets you do that. If you want to, you could even ignore the farming elements altogether, and spend most of your time socialising and romancing the NPCs. The game moves forward no matter what you're doing, but it never leaves you behind. There's a day and night cycle, and an in-game calendar with events which you may need to prepare for, but these things don't result in a game over if you miss them, or if you aren't prepared enough for them. The game was never even intended to be played in a particularly efficient or quick way. Barone even designed elements of the game to deter the player away from this, such as the cooking mechanics, focusing on buffs rather than being able to sell them for more money. The game's pacing and speed of development is a core reason as to why it works so great as an RPG. As you fish or mine, for instance, you'll gain hidden experience for that activity and can level up that skill during the night, which can lead to more items to craft, or using less energy during the activity. Both of these lead to slowly gaining more and more possibilities within the game, unlocking new items to use on your farm, or being able to do more in one day with your energy. This is something I will come back to later. Eventually, with each skill, you'll be presented with a choice. In the farming skill, for example, you can pick between benefiting more from animal products or from crops, which again lets you play your own way. Of course, being an RPG, Stardew will have to have the role-playing elements done right, which it really does. Each NPC is so unique from one another, and it never feels like there are too many. Their presence makes the world feel so much more alive, and as you progress through the game, you start developing these friendships and bonds with them. You learn what each character likes and what their hobbies are, and maybe one special villager will be the one you start a romantic connection with. The quest system will reward you for your exploration and give you a chance to interact with villagers that you haven't spoken to as much before. It's also a good way to get gold if the regular playstyle isn't quite for you. If this isn't enough to convince you of the RPG elements of the game, then maybe the general story of the game will. Early on in the game, you're able to access the community centre, which is where a big chunk of the game progression comes from. You're able to donate certain items you find, which urges you to try out the different activities. There's a fish tank bundle where you can give specific fish that you catch, a crops bundle, and even just a straight up purchasable bundle. And if this isn't for you, then you can go to the Joja Mart, which is supposed to be the antagonist corporation of the game, and basically sell your soul to Morris to gain all the rewards for various amounts of money, subsequently turning the community centre into a warehouse. Again, this allows the player to play the game as they want to, and make their own choices in the world. Stardew isn't a game that is supposed to be rushed through, although you probably can if that's what you enjoy most. At its best, Stardew is played in a relaxed atmosphere where you can take a lot of time to slowly unlock new items to craft and become more proficient in each activity. Just when the game starts to run out of new things, you level up a skill and there is a new game mechanic. The pacing is done perfectly for an RPG game where you don't feel like you have to grind for hours to be making progress on anything, but also don't just give you all of the unlockable game elements really early on. Initially, there's only a certain amount of stuff for you to do, and as you play more and more, new things become available to you. Some areas are unlocked, some items are craftable, and some logs and boulders are now breakable. The first few days of the game will mainly be filled with talking to townsfolk, watering your crops, and maybe clearing up your farm a bit. Then the fishing mechanic is introduced. After a few days the mines open up. Soon enough you're able to use the community centre and suddenly the world is so much bigger, and there is so much more stuff you can do in each day. After a while of playing you may level up farming for instance, and now you have a scarecrow. Maybe you level it up again and gain access to the sprinklers and mayonnaise machine, so you buy a chicken coop and raise some chickens for their eggs, and just like that the stuff you're able to do in each day has grown so much. Not to mention all the other factors for progression like heart levels with villagers and events which give the valley much more life. Ironically, you'll get to a point in the game where some of the earlier things to do will become obsolete. You'll complete the community centre and museum, your higher quality sprinklers will efficiently water crops each day, the mines will be fully explored and much easier to find ores. Instead though, you'll gain access to things like Skull Cavern and set your sights on much harder to obtain materials, or try to hunt for the remaining achievements so that little hat mouse will sell you that sombrero you've had your eyes on since day one. Something I always forget about Stardew is how detailed and interesting the entire world is, which is exactly what you'd want in an RPG game. Near the start of the game, where there's much less to do because the mines aren't opened up and you probably only have a handful of crops to water each day, you have such a great chance to explore the entire town and beyond. There are dozens of different things to interact with, which may give you some funny text or just help with the world building in general. And even in areas where there isn't much to interact with, the game is still packed full of interesting scenery which is brought to life with the beautiful pixel art. I recently started a new save for the first time in a long while, and in the handful of days before the mines opened up I was surprised with how much freedom there was to do whatever you fancy in terms of exploration. And this only progresses as you play the game, when eventually you can gain access to the spa, the quarry, the desert, the secret forest, and so on. It's like this amazingly detailed world that never really gets stale between how everything looks and feels differently during the different seasons, and how you're constantly unlocking new areas to visit. Stardew Valley isn't necessarily a game aimed at adults, but it's straight up wrong to say that the game is only enjoyable for a younger audience. There are some themes that the game touches on which can honestly be more serious and deep for adult players. One of the major themes is Shane, who suffers from depression and alcoholism. At first he's cold and hateful towards the player, often telling them to leave him alone, but the game has a gifting mechanic which can be a faster way of gaining hearts with different townsfolk, along with just interacting with them each day. And over the course of the game you see Shane go from a dismissive, hate-filled person to being more open and optimistic. When reaching certain heart levels with him you unlock new cutscenes, and in one he's drunk and asks why he shouldn't just roll off the cliff, and the player is shown just why Shane has been acting the way he has throughout the game. And this is just one character. Each villager has their own story and ways in which they progress as you get closer with them. None of them feel boring to speak to, and even the non-romanceable villagers still feel worth speaking to each day. The quality and love put into Stardew Valley ties everything together. Nothing was left forgotten about, and every little detail has so much thought behind it. Again, the game took 4 years to create, and for good reason. The art looks incredible, the soundtrack fits each location fantastically, and all of the characters have what feels like genuine emotion behind them. Games that have this love put into them often tend to be something special, and Stardew is nothing short of that. Which makes sense because the entire thing started as a passion project based on games that he loved. It wasn't made with the idea of how to make as much money as fast as possible. Baroni genuinely cared about the quality of the game, and about the player's experience with the game. He wouldn't release it until it was finished and to a standard that he liked. He remade multiple parts and taught himself how to create elements like the art and the music, and worked tirelessly for weeks after the game's release to patch all the bugs. One thing that makes him really stand out as a developer that loved the game though is the stories from people saying how when their files were corrupted early in the game's release, Eric asked them to send him the files themselves for him to fix personally. I mean, come on, you don't see many other developers doing this sort of thing. Stardew Valley is truly a unique game, and is one of the best farming RPGs that has ever been created, and this is only magnified by the fact that it was made by one sole person whose dedication and passion for the game has made it what it is today. While being based on a handful of other games, Stardew still manages to stand out and honestly even does a lot of things better than the games it was based on. To say Stardew is a good game is an understatement. Everything from the mechanical aspects to the exploration to the dialogue and story progression is just an absolute joy to play through, and that is why Stardew Valley works so well.